Awesome. Guys and girls, thank you so much for tuning in again on a Saturday morning. Maybe getting some of you up out of bed early, depending on your time zone. Appreciate you all being here. I wanted to start off and say this is our final session together. We're very, very mindful of that. It sounds like from the majority of the testimonials and messages that we've had through, sounds like you guys have had a really good experience. It sounds like you're taking away a lot, whether it's in terms of the strategy, the psychology, hopefully a little bit of a mixture of both. And it's going to give you guys that framework that you need to start really removing those limitations in your mind to get to where you want to be going into next year now, probably given the time of year that we're going into. Now, for today's session, I've got nothing too in-depth, technical, not even very, very deep in terms of the psychology stuff. What I want to go through today is a little bit of a recap of some of the highlights that we've covered over the past few weeks, I should say. But I want to build them into a little bit of a framework that I can leave you guys with to help you to basically tackle any psychological challenge that you experience. And the reason I think it's important to end this way is, in my experience, you're going to have different psychology battles depending on various different factors. That could be to do with the amount of money that you're trading. It could be to do with where you are in terms of your journey. It could be to do with specific times of year and market conditions. And there are going to be various factors that influence the specific hurdles that you experience mentally. So for example, trading with a higher account balance than you're used to might introduce some new problems. Having had experiences which maybe connect you with some bad habits might bring about some new challenges. Maybe trading through summer periods where markets are a little less liquid and maybe a little bit more choppy, you might have some experiences, some negative experiences with that, depending on how your strategy performs through different market conditions. And so the idea of this session is, yes, what we focused on over the last few weeks are specific topics and specific nuances that is going to be really, really helpful for your journey. Essentially, what I laid out over the last 6-7 weeks is really a framework of the biggest issues that most traders encounter and how to go about overcoming them. Today, like I said, is more of a generic framework. It's going to be encompassing various different things that we've talked about over the last few weeks, but giving them to you in a way which you can structure them correctly so that whether you have a problem next week, whether you have a problem next year, this is going to be a framework that you can refer to psychologically that will take you step by step and get you closer to overcoming that hurdle. Okay. So let me throw up my whiteboard and we'll get started. Okay, perfect. So for those of you that remember, I know it's quite a few weeks ago now, something that I shared right in our very first session was this idea here. This for me is essentially a core part of my coaching framework. And when I'm working with people on a one-to-one basis, essentially mentally or part of the written plan that I'm mapping out for them and how I'm helping them with their problems is essentially working through layer by layer and going through this framework in order to overcome any challenge that they're experiencing. So this is something that I shared with you guys in our first session together. And this is something that we're going to be building upon a little bit today. And essentially every area that I want to talk about today, so beliefs, awareness, actions, perspective, and reflection, is going to tackle an important part to this overall framework. So for those of you that don't remember it as well, I want to give it a little bit of context. So ideally, what we are all working towards throughout these last few weeks is creating the new identity for yourself of a consistently profitable trader, right? Someone that makes money over a large enough sample size of trades, over a large enough sample size of time. And I want to emphasize, and again, I'm hoping this is obvious by this point, consistently profitable does not mean you make money every day, every week, maybe not even every month or every year. Right? You can go through periods of time where things just don't click. You can go through periods of time where market conditions may change. And I've seen this not in just myself, but also in other people. And I say this not to scare you guys, not to bring down your level of what you think is possible, but I say it because over a large enough sample size of time, I have seen this play out in absolutely everyone. Again, within myself, within other people who have all gone on to be very, very successful traders in their own right. So consistently profitable is about this idea of focusing on probabilities and your long-term performance over time. Now, I'm a true believer that your identity, right, how you frame yourself is essentially a buildup of habits. We cover this again. I think we went through this exercise in our first session together. It's this idea that you can't identify as a certain type of person without having those characteristics. You can't identify as someone that's tidy if you don't habitually look after and tidy up your surroundings. You can't identify as someone that's caring if you don't habitually look after the people around you. Every identity that you encompass has to match a set of characteristics, a set of traits, a set of habits, right? As we talk about in this framework. And so becoming that idea of a consistently profitable trader is really just a collection of making sure that you've instilled the right habits and then repeating them over a consistent and long enough basis that they start to play out and you have those results in your reality. So if your identity is a makeup of your habits, habits are essentially just actions that you repeat. And if you want to be able to influence your actions, you need to understand where they come from. And for the vast majority of us, they tend to come from emotions. Even people that are typically quite logically based, most of us will make decisions based on emotions and then justify those decisions based on some kind of logic after the fact. For the vast majority of humans, we are quite emotional creatures, and it takes a certain type of, I'm not going to say programming, maybe to have some sort of a process or a framework to help you to stray away from that natural path that most of us want to take, which is the emotional decision making, right? This has been proven through many psychological studies. The vast majority of us, for our initial reaction, comes from a side of the mind called by a psychologist, Daniel Kahneman. He framed this idea, System 1, right? System 1 is the part of the brain that's very impulsive, very emotional, very reactionary. And a lot of those things come from that kind of fight or flight response. They drive you to make those very impulsive decisions, which, again, don't necessarily serve you well in the long run, especially in the realm of trading. So actions come from emotions. Emotions generally come from thoughts, right? If I told you guys a joke today and everyone on the call found it funny, and I told you the exact same joke tomorrow, but tomorrow you're having a much worse day. Tomorrow you've got some personal things going on, you're arguing with your partner, you found out some really bad news. You may perceive the exact same joke a different way. The joke is exactly the same, but what's different is your mentality. The thought process behind what is going on is completely different. The moment your thought process is different, your emotions are different, therefore your actions are different. And again, string this out over a long enough basis and you become a completely different person. So everything starts, I truly believe, it starts with something internal. And as we start to trace this back through the steps, that process, generally a big part of it is played out inside the mind. Now, deeper than what goes on internally in terms of our thoughts is, generally speaking, our belief system, right? Our belief system is the core of absolutely everything that we do, and it will completely reframe the thoughts, the emotions, the actions, the habits, and therefore your identity. Right. I remember hearing a great example by, ironically, Andrew Tate. I'm sure many of you are familiar with him. He gave this example a little while ago, which talked about this idea of beliefs. And the example that he used was actually a perfect reflection of it. He's talked about this idea. You can get two people sleeping inside of a big house. One of them believes in ghosts. The other one doesn't. They both wake up in the middle of the night hearing a weird noise. The person that believes in ghosts believe that there's a ghost roaming around. The person that doesn't just says, screw it, it's just the wind, go back to sleep. Same noise, completely different perception of it because your belief system is completely different, right? And we see this in many areas of our life on a day-to-day basis, whether we question it or not. There are going to be some of you on today's call that maybe believe in the idea of good luck and bad luck, right? You'll do the common things where you'll be worried about what happens if you were to break a mirror, or you won't step over 3 drains, or you won't open an umbrella indoors. These all change your perception of the world based on a belief system that has been ingrained into you, right? None of you guys on this call were born with this idea that good luck and bad luck exists. None of you were born believing that if I open an umbrella indoors, it's going to be fundamentally bad luck for me, which means you were taught it somewhere. You were taught that good luck and bad luck exists. And the best way to kind of break down your model of thinking is, what if you were taught much earlier in life that actually opening an umbrella indoors was a sign of good luck? What if you were taught that breaking a mirror was a sign of good luck, right? What if you were taught that a black cat running out in front of you was actually a sign of good luck? All these common things that we connect with the idea that something bad is about to happen in our future can actually be connected with elements of something good happening. And all it takes is a shift in your belief system. And the moment you realize that for the vast majority of everything that we believe, it's all a learned behavior, it gives you a lot of power and control over how you want your life to go. And so I explain all this because I see our role in the markets the same way. I truly believe that becoming a consistently profitable trader is a result of having the right belief system at the very, very core. Now, beliefs is what I want to focus on at the start of today. This is something obviously we discussed in our first session, and I want to make it a little bit more practical and I guess just give you guys a little bit of a reminder of what we covered. Because if you have a certain way of operating, whether that's good or bad, you're going to be acting that way as a result of a belief system that you have particularly formed, right? So the first thing I want to remind you guys of, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. The first thing I want you guys to remember is beliefs are learned. They are all entirely learned experiences. And so if you have a habit which is either empowering or limiting for you, and specifically, obviously, we're talking about trading here, the question that you want to be asking yourself is, where was this belief system born from? Right? Where was this belief system born from? If you are acting on revenge trading, if you're constantly acting on FOMO, if you're constantly over trading, if you're trading out of boredom, if you're doing all of these sorts of things, your mind at some level has to understand that there is a potential reward for this behavior. And the analogy that I always take everyone back to is, if I told you to hold your hand over an open fire, or I asked you to blindfold yourself and go walk around in the roads for half an hour, how many times would you need to do it to understand that it's not a good idea? And the chances are, for most of you, I'd like to think it's probably just once, right? The moment your mind recognizes that this is a stupid thing to do and there is pain associated with this outcome, you are going to be driven to think, feel, and act in a way which is going to deter you from taking that action. The problem is the markets are not always A plus B equals C. It's not always 1 + 2 = 3. They don't always correlate that way. And that means you could do everything wrong sometimes and you could actually be rewarded from it. I say this time and time again, which is, if every time you overtraded or didn't take a trade that was part of your plan, or FOMO'd into the market, or any other habit that you could possibly think of, if every time you did that, you immediately blew every single penny inside your account, right? Forget prop firms. Let's talk personal capital, real hard-earned money that you've put in and saved up over time, and you put it into your personal brokerage account. If every time you acted outside of your plan, that amount went down to zero, how many times are you acting on that bad habit? The reality is probably not many. The problem is most people don't always do this in a way where they truly understand the implications of what could happen over a large enough sample size of time. The honest answer is most people operate in a way whereby they only focus on, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, they're focusing on a positive outcome of their bad habits. Nobody is standing there and thinking, if I put my hand in an open flame over, for a minute or so, actually there's like a 0.01% chance that I'm not going to end up with severe burns, and I'm going to bank on that and I'm going to try it anyway. Or, the analogy that I gave about walking around in the open streets, nobody's like, you know what, maybe there's a 1% chance that I don't get hit by a car. I'm going to put my money on those odds. Doesn't happen, right? But your mind doesn't apply that same level of logical thinking to the markets. It relies on hopes, it relies on wishes. And so talking about this idea raises your level of awareness, and it has to make you far more conscious of this idea of understanding what is likely to happen if you continue with this course of action 100 times over. If you choose to act on FOMO because you have a belief system that has told you at some point in time, you've seen someone else make money by acting on FOMO, you've got into a position where you've acted on FOMO and it's actually made you money before, you have to be able to understand not just what is the potential outcome of this situation, what is the potential outcome if I did this exact same thing 100 times over. If you've got bad habits 9 times out of 10, I'm even stretched to say maybe 10 times out of 10, over a large enough sample size, you'll find that they don't actually make you money. And this is true because if they did, they wouldn't be bad habits. You would classify them as good things, and then it would be okay to act on them if they actually gave you an edge in the market. So the most important thing you could do in terms of your belief system is actually understand, where was that belief system born? Because the best way to start breaking free of a belief system is to understand that it was flawed right from the very beginning. The problem is most people only try to unpack the last experience, right? You think about the last time that you acted on one of your bad habits, lack of patience, FOMO, revenge trading, overtrading, boredom, whatever it is. When most people try and fix the problem, they're only focused on really the last time it happens or the most recent times it happens. Nobody ever stops to think about, when did it first happen? Where did this whole idea that acting on over trading or revenge trading, where did I come to believe that could actually be a positive outcome for me at some point in time, right? That fundamental foundation that we talked about in terms of your psychology, which is your mind is constantly driven away from pain and it is constantly driven towards rewards, it applies exactly here. If you have a bad habit, it's because your mind believes there could be a possible reward attached to the outcome of it. Now, the best thing you could do if you have a bad habit is to ask yourself, where did it come from? And the moment you could identify the first time it happened, where you learned that belief system from, you want to be asking yourself, if you could go back in time, what advice would you give yourself? Right? What would you tell yourself to do differently? If you magically had a time machine and you could go back to the moment in time where you first learned that experience, in your mind, actually visualize yourself going back and telling that younger version of yourself some words of wisdom that you've learned because you've been able to see how that bad habit plays out over time. Now, what this allows you to do is essentially reframe your perspective of your belief system, right? And changing your perspective around the situation, especially when you're doing it as deep as looking at something which has ingrained a belief into you, can really help to shift, change, and break free from some of these mental patterns that you tend to be stuck with time and time again. So again, if you have a bad problem, this is where you want to start. This is where 90, 95, 99% of people do not start from in their trading, right? They start from an area that we're going to be talking about a little bit later down the line, which is the actions, right? Whenever we have a bad habit or something that is not really working for us in our trading, the first thing that most people tend to do is they start focusing on, what can I change? What can I change to start getting different outcomes? And as we've established already with our framework down here, actions are basically the most surface level change that you could start to make. If you don't address the emotions, if you don't address the thoughts, if you don't address the belief system, what you're going to tend to find is you're going to be able to create short-term change, but then you will at some point go back to your default mode of operation. So for you, for those of you on this call, that may look like someone that is usually lacking patience, but then you go into a new week and you say, you know what, this week I'm going to demonstrate the highest level of patience. You go in and you do it, right? You go through Monday to Friday, you have an extremely patient week, you do everything right that you're supposed to do, and you've had the week that you had planned. But at some point in time, something triggers, something kicks you off. There's some volatility in the market. You've missed out on a move. You've seen somebody else post something that you weren't involved in. And suddenly it triggers this urge. It triggers this thought process. It drives this emotion. And then your mind hasn't changed the belief system. So it fundamentally still has this flawed belief that being impatient is the right thing for you long term. Excuse me. Being impatient is the right thing for you long term. And therefore, it makes it attractive to be able to act on that belief. So if you never stop to address the belief system, you will always be bound by the bad thoughts, the bad emotions, and the bad habits that are going to hold you back in trading, right? So make sure if you ever encounter any problem, any psychological issue, start at the belief level. Understand where it truly came from, because until you understand that, you will never understand, or you'll never be able to truly break free of the pattern, because your beliefs are not aligned with what you are trying to create. Okay. So beliefs is I would say, arguably the most important thing, and it's the most neglected one that most traders ignore and don't spend enough time on, primarily because it's not spoken about enough in this industry. Okay. Now, after this, once you've started to tackle your belief system, you want to work on raising your level of awareness. Now, again, something or a couple of things that I've stressed highly over the last 8 weeks now that we've been having sessions together is the two best ways, in my experience, and again, for the many traders that I've worked with and helped over the last 4 or 5 years that I've been doing this now, is meditation and journaling. I highly encourage, if you've got to this point and haven't already dabbled in these things, I would highly encourage giving them a go. I know David is is a big advocate of journaling as well. If you can couple that with meditation, for me, those two fit very well together in terms of raising your level of awareness. Now, again, I'll probably mention this on previous sessions before. There are 3 apps that I've used for a minimum of a year each, but they are great places to get started. If you're completely new to meditation, I would encourage you starting here, right? Usually Headspace or Calm. Again, I use these both for over 1 year each, and they both have great guided meditations that tend to teach you the right things that you need to understand, specifically about what you need to do in meditation. They keep you aware, they keep you locked in, they help you and just guide you through the complete process from beginning to end, and those are really helpful. Headspace especially, I think for me, stood out as one that's great to go to as a beginner. And nowadays, I spend more time on Insight Timer. I do believe they have guided meditations, but I actually just like the unguided ones. I just have sounds or noises playing in the background. And that personally works best for me. It helps to... I've developed now a good habit of being able to recognize my thoughts when my mind drifts. And I think that is best ingrained through probably a guided meditation to start with. Now, I put all 3 up on the board. Again, these are the 2 that I would recommend for beginners. This is something, if you want the unguided ones, I think this is a greater app in that respect. These 2 are paid options, at least from the last time I looked. You pay a monthly or an annual subscription. Insight Timer, till date, I've been using it for many years now. I've never spent a penny. So if cost is a factor to you, that's important. Again, some options and some variety in there. But again, the purpose of meditation and the reason it's so powerful is every day that you sit down to observe your breath, you start ingraining the mental habit of just becoming aware of what your mind is, right? And again, I want to emphasize at this stage, meditation, the purpose of it is not to clear your mind. It's not to become more peaceful. It's not to become less reactive. Those are all things which tend to happen, but they tend to happen as a byproduct of what we're trying to achieve. Meditation and the purpose of what you're doing here is just to become aware of what the mind is experiencing. The more you can become aware and take yourself off of autopilot, that is the skill that's going to transfer into your trading, right? You're going to be able to recognize emotions before they become actions. You're going to be able to recognize the thoughts before they influence your emotions. And when you can recognize them at a deeper level, it's much easier to start to change what you're doing, as opposed to waiting for the temptation, the urge, the action to actually come out and then try and regulate it after the fact. Usually by that point, you're too far gone. You're at a point where the emotions are so high, you can't do anything except act on your bad action. And you're at a point where you've already acted on the action and it's too late to do anything about it. You're just kicking yourself in hindsight, right? So again, meditation, highly, highly recommend. And again, journaling, I can see many of you are creating your journals, things like this, but I would, again, make sure and just always encourage that you're documenting everything that you need in terms of your strategy and coupling that up with the psychology, right? The psychological element is going to give you a greater level of detail as to why you did or did not stick with the plan that you initially had. So when you start combining the both of these together, meditation is going to give you a much greater awareness of what's going on mentally. And journaling, once you start building a good collection of data as you track your trades going forward, or even through back testing, but I would more so encourage it for live testing, you're actually going to start to discover the patterns between your thoughts and your actions, right? Your thoughts and your actions, and that eventually leads to your outcomes. So if you want to create new outcomes in your trading, you have to start by taking new actions. If you want to take new actions, it starts from understanding what is changing mentally, which is causing me to take these detrimental actions. Okay. So the combination of both of these together is, for me, it's the best recipe in order to build the level of awareness that you need to start breaking free of these bad patterns and habits that we tend to experience. The main reason you want to be doing this, especially as a combination of both of these things, is it helps you to create the right expectations. When you understand that typically, because you've got the right level of detail in your journal, every time I experience a loss or every time I plan for a trade that didn't get filled, I experience this type of emotion. It sets the right expectation. You then understand I'm the type of person that usually after maybe 2 or 3 losses, I get frustrated. I get pissed off. Usually after a couple of break-even trades, I'm wanting to take revenge on the markets. Maybe after 3 or 4 days of having no trades, I get a little bit trigger happy and I'm just itching to get into the market and I take a trade out of complete boredom. The more awareness you have around those specific patterns, it's going to allow you to be inside of a position where you can expect those thoughts and emotions to happen. And then when they arise, they're no longer taking you by surprise anymore. They're putting you in a position where you're like, yeah, expecting this to happen. And now I have a playbook of how I want to react to this situation. I want to regulate my breathing. I want to change my perspective. I want to walk away for a little bit. I want to address why this is happening. There are many things that you could be doing, right? But it starts from having that higher level of awareness. So both of those, again, very highly recommended that you couple those together. And I think they'll be really, really beneficial. So we've touched on beliefs. We've then talked about the importance of awareness. And again, I'm going through these in the step-by-step order that you want to be following when you're encountering any of your issues going forward. After you've started to raise your level of awareness, and again, started to align those expectations, then and only then, I would say is a good time to actually start focusing on taking some actions, right? Start planning about what you want to be changing going forward. And again, we touched on this at the very beginning when we talked about beliefs. This area here is where most people start, right? Most people say, I lack patience or I'm constantly acting on FOMO. Next week, I'm going to change that because I'm going to implement a checklist, or I'm going to walk away, or I'm going to tell myself I'm only allowed to trade 2 times per day, right? I'm only giving myself 2 bullets each day. And if it doesn't work, then I walk away. The problem is, until you address the belief system, you are always likely to default back to your original planned actions, because that is what your belief system is telling you the way the world operates. Okay. So when it comes to actions, what do you need to be mindful of? Well, I'm hoping if you guys have taken anything from my psychology sessions over the last 8 weeks or so, the one thing that I'm hoping is ingrained is that you don't want to rely on your mind to make decisions, right? You don't want to rely on your mind to make decisions. The one thing that we've pointed out, and we've talked about studies, and I think you guys will agree with this concept, is that your mind is generally swayed by a variety of things, right? Influenced by beliefs, influenced by emotions, influenced by cognitive biases, right? These are all things that we've discussed in some lengthy detail over the last 8 weeks together. And the premise of all of this discussion, re-emphasizing these things week over week, is to get you guys to understand that your mind is actually quite an unreliable thing to work with. It's unreliable because it can be so easily influenced by any one of these things that you're experiencing. It could be a deep-rooted belief system. It could be the emotions that you're experiencing because of something that's going on in your personal life. It could be the natural cognitive biases that tend to affect all human beings. And this is what is making your mind unreliable or inconsistent in the long run. And again, it's something that you just want to be aware of. So the best thing you could start to do when it comes to making sure you're taking the right actions is you want to be asking yourself, why am I thinking about doing this? Is this what my mind is telling me? Is this what my gut is telling me? Or is this what my data is telling me, right? So what you want to be focusing on is relying on data and statistics and your process, right? And again, the things that I encourage to get these areas in check is to make sure that you've done your back testing, right? This is something that I've drilled into you guys, and I think I've mentioned it pretty much every single week over the last 8 weeks. And I'm hoping you guys are understanding and seeing the importance of it, right? I know I've had discussions with at least 1 or 2 of you that have been sharing and going through your back testing and the data that you've been collecting as a result of that, and sharing how it's had a massive impact on your confidence. It's had a massive impact on your expectations of what may come from the market. And these are your foundations, right? A lot of psychological problems can generally be fixed if you have the right foundations. And the right foundations are primarily about knowing your data. So yes, there is a core part of what I do, which is based around specific psychological concepts and understandings. But a big part of what I do in terms of fixing people's performance or enhancing their performance is actually making sure they have the right foundations. It's making sure that if you have a strategy, do you know it well enough? Have you got the data to actually prove it over time? Because your data and your statistics are going to be absolutely everything for you in the long run, right? They'll give you that level of confidence, they manage those expectations, and that's what starts to set you up for long-term success. Past this point, I always encourage, and again, something I've talked about heavily over the last few weeks, is, if I could spell, to make sure you have those pre-trade checklists, right? The same way and the same analogy that I used when I first shared it with you guys, pilots, regardless of experience, have to go through a pre-flight checklist before taking off. They understand that the more and more you do something, the easier it is to go onto autopilot, and the more likely it is that you're just going to skip over something because you're not really conscious of that process. Having that pre-trade checklist forces you to be process orientated. It forces you to make sure that what you're about to do is in line with your plan. And that is the core part of everything that you can do, right? You could be experiencing the worst level of FOMO. You could have the worst urges to overtrade. You could be completely bored and wanting to find some excitement. You could have all the worst and heightened emotions that you could possibly experience. But if every time you're acting, you're doing it by checking off a pre-trade checklist, there is nothing to fear, right? Because if it doesn't match your checklist, then there's no action to be taking. And that's keeping your mind conscious, is keeping it locked in to the present moment, right? The last thing I would add to this in terms of making sure you remain process orientated is know your why. And again, this is something that I stressed. I think it was a little bit of Q&A that we had with one of the members, one of the bootcamp members, and it's understanding what is your deepest reason for actually wanting to trade. And again, if this is something that you didn't watch back over those sessions, if it was something that is sounding unfamiliar, I want you guys to think about why you're trading past the point of freedom and money. Because freedom and money, again, are the surface level things that most people want. How much money do you need and what are you going to do with it? How much free time do you need and what do you want to do with it? Be specific, be clear, involve people, loved ones around you that you want to include on these experiences or do things with, right? The more you can make these significant, the more you can include loved ones, friends, family, whatever it is around you as part of these bigger goals. It gives you a deeper and more meaningful reason to do the right things, even when you don't feel like it. And this can be used as a very powerful leverage point in those moments where you're feeling highly emotional and don't really feel like sticking with your plan, okay? So well worth making sure that you have your why very clear and significantly pictured in your mind throughout your trading day. I think that can really, really help you. Last thing I want to mention here is when we're talking about actions, we're obviously referring to the idea and going back to the framework that we touched on at the start. Your actions are largely influenced by your emotions. And I want to take a second just to emphasize the idea that emotions are not the problem. They are a symptom of a deeper problem. 9 times out of 10, this tends to be the case. And so I want you guys to remember that your goal is not necessarily to try and turn off emotions. It's to recognize that emotions are a normal part of the human experience. And the best thing that you could possibly do is to stop trying to fight them, stop trying to turn them off, and just focusing on recognizing them and regulating them, right? And again, that's going to be much easier to do if you've done the last step correctly and started to raise your level of self-awareness. Okay, so these are a few things I want you to remember in terms of your actions. If you've got all your foundations right, if you've built a process-orientated approach, then regardless of what emotions you feel, it's going to be far easier to do the right thing at the time where you need it. Okay, so again, quick steps to help you guys to focus on those specific elements when it comes to actually taking action. Now, next step, I would get you guys to focus on perspective, right? I'm going to keep this one short and sweet because, again, this is something that we've touched on a fair amount throughout the last 8 weeks. And we've talked about this idea that new trains of thought are the result of a different focus point. In essence, what I'm saying here is that if you want to start thinking in different ways, you have to start focusing on different things. I answered this question very briefly the other day. I think it was in the question channel. We talked about this idea of one of the members was asking about how do they become less fixated on money and how do they start focusing more on the process? And the reality is, if we were to go back and unpack what that person had asked and why they were experiencing that problem, the chances are that they are measuring their ability to succeed directly on P&L. If you don't have any other focus point apart from measuring your success based on P&L, guess what? You're going to be attached to money. And so what you want to do, and what I suggested on that call, is you need to change your focus point. I gave a couple of ways to start to do that, to reduce that level of attachment and change the focus point, but you want to start changing your focus point. Now, at any given time, regardless of what you're experiencing in the market, whether it's attachment to money, as we started to discuss, whether it's just an unexpected outcome, whether it's an unfavorable outcome, whatever it may be, if you want to change how you are thinking, if you want to develop a new perspective in the markets, it starts from really understanding how to ask yourself more powerful questions. Because, and again, something that I've talked about in one of our previous sessions is this idea that the mind is a very complex tool, but it becomes far, far easier when you start asking it the right sorts of questions, right? The mind will basically answer any question that you throw at it. If I asked each of you guys watching this call, don't think of a black cat, guess what? Most of you are thinking of a black cat. If I ask you not to picture a losing trade, you're going to picture a losing trade. So anything that you get your mind to focus on, that's where it's naturally going to gravitate towards. So if you want to change how you're thinking, start asking more empowering questions. And so you can keep some of these questions noted down to reflect on throughout your trading day to help shift your perspective when you're struggling to accept an unexpected outcome, an unfavorable one, whatever it may be. But these are things that you can actually ask yourself to check yourself to make sure that you're doing the right things at the right time. You can ask yourself something simple like, am I acting on my plan? Very simple question, right? Again, most of the time when people are acting on emotion, they are not conscious of that process. They are not fully present to understand that I'm about to do something that is not really in my best interest. Asking yourself or seeing that written down in front of you to have that trigger and a reminder can help keep you aware of what you need to understand, right? I do this for trading. I do this for coaching. I have things written down on a piece of paper, which I keep down in front of me to help trigger the right sorts of questions and thought models that I need when I'm either in a coaching call, when I'm going through my trading stuff, right? These are things that I just have written down because I understand the power of having the right questions thrown at the right time and how it can change your perspective, right? A really good question that you could ask yourself going into a fresh trading day: am I frustrated by my last mistake? One of the biggest problems that most traders encounter is they have a flawed thought process because they are carrying the performance of yesterday into the performance of today. And so simply by asking yourself, am I still frustrated about the last mistake that I made, is going to give you a big insight to understand whether you're mentally operating on a good and level playing field. If you're still pissed off about the mistake that you made yesterday or in the last trade or something that happened 6 months ago, trust me, at some point in time, that's going to come up to the surface and that's going to play a part in your actions, right? If you missed a trade by 2 pips, you didn't get your fill, whatever it may be, and you were frustrated at the time, you walked away, you did the right thing, and you came into the next day and you're like, yes, today's going to be a better day. But you can't reflect back on that experience and be like, you know what, it is what it is, shit happens, the market does what it does. But if you're the type of person that's still hung up on that and you're like, man, if I had just got my fill, I would have got a 5R at the end of this trade. I would have been sitting pretty. I would have passed my challenge. I would have got funded. I would have got paid, whatever it may be. You're basically trying to fight this battle with one hand tied behind your back, right? If your mind is not mentally in the right place, it's going to find a way to come to the surface. And again, something that you always want to be aware of. One of my favorite questions to ask yourself to instantly change your perspective: how could this situation be worse? Okay, you took a losing trade. Do you still have your account? Do you still have a roof over your head? Can you still breathe? Can you still walk? Can you still do all of the day-to-day things that you're supposed to be doing, right? If you can't do any of these things, or if you're imagining that, that is a worst case scenario for you, then actually you can start to be grateful for the fact that it's not worse today, right? You're in actually a much better position than what you think. If there is for every time that you've made a mistake, somebody has made a far worse mistake. And if you can flip your perspective to think about that worst case scenario, it can actually give you some gratitude, to make you realize that could have been worse. I can recover from this. I can pick myself up, dust myself off, and we can go again tomorrow, right? Another one I'm a big fan of: what advice would you give to a friend, right? 9 times out of 10, when we are going through something, we can't see the answer because we are so blind when we're looking at it from our own perspective. And again, some of you may have experienced this. If a friend, a family member, a colleague, someone comes up to you and asks you for advice about a particular situation, you seem to be able to give the world's best advice. And the reality is, it's because you're looking at it from a completely different perspective. And taking that perspective can actually be very, very empowering for you as an individual, right? You can walk away from a situation and you can start thinking, okay, I'm looking at this situation through my set of eyes. What does it look like for somebody else, right? When you're in that moment where you're thinking about going on tilt, you're pissed off, you're frustrated at the markets, and you can't seem to do anything except hit the button, imagine yourself looking at that version of yourself like a fucking degenerate gambler on their computer hitting buy or sell for the very last time. What does that perspective look like? What would you say to yourself in that moment? Because it's the exact same advice that you would tell a friend. So asking that very simple question, what advice would you give to a friend if they came to you with the same problem? You can actually come up with the clearest and probably the simplest solution for the problems that you have. But it's always a struggle to see past that initial perspective. So shift that mental framework in your mind, think about it from that different perspective, and you'll start to get a whole world of new answers. Last thing I want to throw in there: what is this teaching me? Again, challenges, setbacks, hurdles, whatever it may be, they are inevitable as part of your trading journey. And the moment you can start to reframe your perspective to start understanding that all of these things that I'm going through are potential learning points for me, right? I can learn something from this situation. I can learn something about the conditions of the market. I can learn something about my approach, which is maybe not that great. I can learn something about this worst period of drawdown that I've experienced that's going to make me better for the next time that I want to go about this, right? I could have managed risk differently. I could have, not taken certain trades that I did end up taking that were maybe more aggressive when I should have been more conservative. Whatever it may be, there is always something to learn from these particular situations. So if you're at a point now where you've worked on your belief system, you've been raising your level of awareness, you started to think about what actions you should take in line with your data, your statistics, your process, the best way to start breaking free of those mental habits that are holding you back and making it hard to act on those actions, once you know what they are, is to start by shifting your perspective. Okay. The last thing, and this is more for ensuring long-term success in this industry, is to make sure that you're allowing some time to have periods of reflection, right? And these reflection points should allow you to uncover how to improve and refine your edge over the long run, okay? So little things that I get people to focus on, and again, I mentioned this at the very, very beginning, is to reflect on your daily, your performance at the end of a day, or your performance at the end of a week or end of a month, and you look back over certain trades and you ask yourself, if I repeated this 100 times, what would be the likely outcome? Right? And the honest answer is, if you are looking at a particular type of setup, or if you're thinking about a particular action that you took, and you don't know the answer to that question, right? What would happen if I repeated this 100 times? What would be the outcome? If you don't know what the outcome is, this is where your backtesting comes in, right? This is where your data collection comes from. Once you start to test these things over time, you will get all the answers that you possibly need. Every question that you have about your strategy can be answered by having more data, right? Asking a question about what would happen if I went to break even here, or where should I put my stop loss? Where's the most efficient place to do this? Or what's the best place to scale in or scale out of the market? If you have enough data testing exactly those ideas over the last 100 occurrences, it will answer the question for you. And actually, I would argue it's the better way to do it, because not only is it going to give you the answer, but because you've had the exposure to seeing it play out for yourself, you're also going to have the confidence to do it. Whereas if you're taking something that I've said, or whether something that David has said at face value, because you think that we have maybe more experience with you than you in the industry, then yes, maybe it has some merit, but are you going to have the confidence to stick with it, right? Because if I had an approach, or David had an approach that taught you that you need to do X, Y, and Z, and that's what's going to make you profitable, but the last 3 times you followed our advice exactly, it didn't work, are you going to lose confidence in it? If you know and you've seen something play out over and over again, and you've seen it with your eyes, you're not just trusting somebody's words, it's going to go a lot further in terms of ingraining that right foundation, confidence, expectations to keep you sticking with it in the long run, right? Some really other powerful reflective questions is this moving me closer to my goals or further away, right? So these are all just a list of things that you can reflect on end of day, end of week, end of month. That's going to help you to develop some very empowering thought processes to help you improve over time, right? So is this action moving me closer towards my goals, or is it moving me further away? Very, very simple question, very, very effective answer. Again, not a lot of people actually stop to address certain things like this. The moment you can start doing that, you start to identify, these are the things I should be doubling down on because they're moving me towards my goals. These are the times where I should be stepping back or looking to eliminate or reduce these things where possible, because they're moving me further away from my goals, right? Off the back of this, you can ask yourself, why did I act the way I did, right? And again, I'm hoping if you're starting to think about this in the right way, this is going to start pushing you back towards your belief system, right? You act the way you did normally because of an emotion, which is influenced by a thought, and the thought is all stemming from some type of belief system. Unpack the belief system, you're going to find it's much easier to change, create that lasting change when it comes to your specific habits. Okay. Off the back of that, you want to be asking yourself, what can I repeat to get better results? And how can I make this more attractive? Right. So if you've identified a specific habit that is going to be beneficial for you, you want to be making it as easy and attractive as possible to continue to repeat that habit, right? And again, goes back to that core foundation of your mind sticks with things that are rewarding for you, and it tries to eliminate things that are painful for you. So the more you can focus on doing something that is going to be attractive for you in the long run, the better and the easier it's going to be to do it in the moment. And again, this could be very, very simple things. Again, start by knowing your data. If you know that following this set of criteria is going to give you a 50, 60, 70% win rate, even a 40% win rate, right? Depending on your risk to reward, can be a fantastic thing. If you know that it's going to be good, amplify your results, right? The same way that I've emphasized and I've talked about on many sessions, this idea of amplifying pain, you can also amplify the wins. If you have a good action that you want to stick with, amplify what it plays out to like, right? Today, I take this trade and it makes me 1 to 2, 1 to 3 risk to reward, whatever it may be. Today, this nets me X amount. What if I was to take 2 of these every single week for the next year? What if I was to repeat that every single year for the next decade? What does that do to me financially, right? Make it more attractive. The more attractive it is, the more likely you are to be able to stick with it in the long run. And the other side of this is when you identify the bad habits is what can I avoid? How can I make this more painful? And again, I'm not going to go into too much detail on that one. That one, the idea of amplifying the pain, that sort of exercise is one that we talked about countless times throughout our sessions together. And I'm hoping is, again, just a little refresher at this point, but something easy that you can do and reflect on. That is essentially the framework that I take everyone through, right? And again, it goes round in it goes clockwise, starting from your belief system. And this is something that I want you guys to be able to take away from this session and be able to apply it for your own habits, your own routines, your own thought process going forward. If you guys have any psychological battles, follow this framework step by step, and it's going to get you far, far closer to helping you to break free from those patterns over time. Okay. I'm of course going to screenshot this. I'll upload this with the recording of today so you have a complete copy of this. But I'm hoping that has been helpful for you, right? Something that you can actually take away step by step and actually work through some of the challenges that you may be experiencing at any point in time. Couple things that I want to address before I open things up for any Q&A in the chat today. Sorry, let me get my notes back up. The question that I talked about in Discord the other day from one of our members asking, how do I become more process orientated and focusing on my process rather than money? I want to emphasize that a big part of mentally laying the right foundations to focus on process, it has to come from rewarding yourself for the right things, right? And this is something, if that member specifically is watching this, this is specifically for you, but this applies to anyone, right? If you are someone that only ever rewards yourself for doing or having a successful day only when you've made money, if that's the only time you feel good about yourself, you're setting yourself up to fail. If you have done all the right things, but you've lost money on the day and you're feeling crap about yourself and you're beating yourself up and you're telling yourself you need to work harder, you're actually reinforcing the wrong things mentally. What I want you guys to get to a stage to be able to do is to understand, if I followed my plan, if I've done everything right in line with my process, that should be the time that I reward myself. Forget the outcome. Forget the P&L for a second. The reward doesn't have to be you go buy yourself a fucking Gucci bag or some shit like that. It could be even the smallest of things that you find enjoyable, but by mentally recognizing I'm doing this because I did the right thing today. It could be something as small as I'm going to allow myself to watch my favorite Netflix show before I go to bed today, right? That could be a reward that you don't maybe something normally allow yourself to do. And on days where you've done the wrong thing, you should be punishing yourself. For me, those early punishments were, I'm not going to allow myself to trade for the rest of the week. That's my cutoff point, right? That is my punishment to teach myself that I've done the wrong thing. My punishment is now I am no longer allowed to participate in the markets. I'm closing down. I'm not looking at my charts for the rest of the week. And on the weekend, when I go back and I look at all the shit that I should have been involved in and didn't, because I was stupid and I messed up at the very beginning, you're teaching your mind that not following your process has consequences, and you have to be in charge of implementing those things. I would always encourage, if you have the ability to get yourself an accountability group, a partner, a mentor, a coach, whatever it may be, just someone to help with that level of accountability, you're going to be 100 times more effective at being able to do this, right? Your accountability partner, whether it's maybe someone inside of the boot camp, whether it's someone that you know in real life, whether it's someone else that you met from social media, whether it's that coach, mentor, whatever it is, they need to be the ones to tell you that even if you've made money today, but you did it by doing all the wrong things, you fucked up, right? You did something wrong, because they are understanding that if you play this out over a long enough span of time, it's not going to work in your favor. And they need to be able to call you out in those moments, right? They need to be able to help and force you to prioritize process and rewarding that process over rewarding P&L. The moment you can make that shift in your mind, things will become far, far easier. The last thing to address, and again, I'm basing this on some of the testimonials and feedback that we've had over the last few days. I want you guys to remember that what myself and David have covered over the last 8 weeks is not designed to be a quick fix that's designed to just give you overnight profits. Some of you, we're hoping, and again, I've seen this in some of the messages and some of the, the responses, is that you're actually already starting to see the results, which is fantastic. You're already seeing the market in a new way. You can understand the approach that David has given you. It's giving you much more reliability, and maybe you're starting to apply the psychological concepts on top, right? I want you to understand that this 8 weeks is not about creating overnight millionaires. It is about laying the right foundations so that when you decide to build the big empire on top, if the foundations are good, you're going to be solid going forward, right? So I want to just reemphasize this idea of playing the long game, right? Take everything slow going forward and learn to scale up over time. I think so many people would benefit from the idea of thinking about their performance in the market over years and decades rather than days and weeks. The moment you start playing that long game, the moment you commit to the process of time and just showing up and improving and applying all of the things that we've talked about over the last 8 weeks together, you're going to start having those big breakthroughs in your trading. But it only comes as a result of just committing to the process over time. Alden says, thinking about taking cold showers when I don't act according to the plan. Awesome, man. Like, if you find cold showers a painful experience and it's something that you don't want to do, and you force yourself to do it in those moments, by all means. I know some people that force themselves to do press-ups. They go out for walks in the rain, whatever it may be. Like, you just have to find your own way of punishing yourself for doing the wrong things, right? If you've got, you could even go as far as, if you've got a partner, someone that you trust, and a trading partner, accountability partner, whatever it may be, if you've done something wrong, get them to change your password on your accounts. Actually lock you out of your personal broker, your MT4, your MT5, delete the apps off your phone, whatever it may be. Get them to change those so you're hard locked out. That is a shit punishment for a lot of people. But again, it teaches your mind when you don't do the right things, there is a punishment attached to it. So get creative with this idea of the reward and the punishment system. There is no one size fits all. There are certain things that are going to work for some people and they're not going to be effective for others. This is where I say you have to understand what works best for you as a person. The more you can best understand yourself, the better you're going to be and the more consistent you're going to be in the long run. Okay. Any final questions before we wind down for the day? Anybody still struggling with anything, and especially doesn't have an idea of how they want to overcome that? Is there any questions that I could specifically ask? Any questions I can specifically answer? Okay, I'm going to take that as a good sign. I'm hoping you guys have enjoyed the last 8 weeks together. Very, very thankful for those of you that have been tuning into the sessions live. I know they've been hosted over a variety of different times. So I always appreciate you guys taking your time out. I hope you guys have found some value in the psychological aspect. And I think for a lot of people, there are going to be a big part of what you need to focus on in the beginning is the strategy. It's the technical side. It's getting those foundations. It's getting the data together. And what you're going to find, a lot of the psychological concepts that we've been through, they need to be applied on top, right? Once you start getting involved in the markets, once you start actually having these experiences, it's going to be very, very beneficial for you in the long run. Alden said, will you stay in the Discord? I'm always going to be part of the Discord. Just outside of the boot camp, it's going to have far less attention for me. My priority will just be on the existing projects that I'm kind of on. But yes, I will remain in David's Discord. Levin says, thanks, great streams. Thank you so much, man. BC says, I couldn't attend every session live, but the value was abnormal. Thank you very much. It means a lot to me, man. Thank you so much. G6, thank you so much, Sand. Your sessions completely changed my view on some stuff, full of gems and wisdom, starting to see immediate improvements on certain aspects. That's awesome, man. You know what? And that's the thing that I don't always stress at the time. Like, I'm never a believer that someone's going to sell you this idea that there's an overnight quick fix. Some things can really help in the moment and you can see immediate results, but I'm always emphasizing play that long game. So if you've already got to the point where you've got to that stage where you're seeing the results, fantastic, man. Super happy for you. BC says, do you have other streams where we can follow you? So the main place I'm usually active is on Twitter. I'll drop my link below. I don't know if you're already following me on there. That's me on Twitter. Usually from Twitter, I will announce any other sort of public streams that I'm doing and things like that. I have a weekly newsletter, which I drop out for free, which just gives insights on psychology, which you're welcome to sign up to too. But a lot of my other work is actually outside of the stuff with Funding Next is just behind. The Funding Next stuff is usually free and readily available for a lot of people. But with other communities and things like that, it's usually behind some kind of paywall. So yeah, but now if you hit me up on Twitter, it's probably the best place to keep up to date with everything that I have going on. I already follow you also to the newsletter. That's awesome. Thank you so much, man. Alden says, the professional approach, I needed to work on my problems. This is really solid advice. People would charge a shit ton of money for way less value. I agree. Genuinely, man. I know that there are some people in this space that are charging like $5,000 for like mentorship, and they teach probably far less value than myself and David have shared here. It's crazy money, man. I don't believe that education in this space needs to have that sort of price tag. So yeah, it is what it is. BC says, I have a final small question or problem. Hit me, man. Fire away. Sorry, just presume waiting for him to type. The suspense is killing me. So BC says, I have noticed that your belief system is very important. Every time when it's going good, I fuck up. Okay. So I'm not sure if that's the end of your question, but the immediate thing I would start to map out there is you want to be able to understand the connection between what is causing you to screw up. Because again, the action, the actual whatever you mess up on is not the problem, right? The problem is the emotion, the thought, and eventually uncovering the belief system of where that started. So if this is something that is happening to you time and time again, where you feel like you start doing well and then you start self-sabotaging, you want to start to get clearer on how that pattern of behavior is panning out over time. So you want to understand, usually when I have one win, 2 wins, 3 wins, I then screw up. And I'm screwing up by actually straying from my plan, or I'm not managing risk in the way that I should be. And then you want to start to, once you have a very clear way of clarifying how you're screwing up, trace it back. When was the last time it happened? Can I remember an experience from 6 months ago? Can I remember experience from 1 year ago? Can I remember the first time that this ever happened? When was the first time I went through that pattern of self-sabotage? Have I ever been rewarded for doing that action, but actually instead of screwing up, it led to a good thing. Because that's where your belief system is going to be born from, right? It's either going to be seeing somebody else do it, or it's going to be a case where you've done it yourself, right? Where maybe, again, I'm just hypothesizing here, but if your pattern is you've taken 2 or 3 winners in a row, and then you do something that screw up, you stray from your plan, you don't manage risk correctly. Have you ever done that? And that what would have been a screw up has actually rewarded you, right? That bad habit, over trading or risking more than you should have, it's actually ended in a reward, because it's that moment in time that is the foundation of your belief system. And that's the one that you want to be reflecting on. That's the one that you want to be shifting your perspective with. And that's the one that you need to be understanding. This is where I have started to go wrong from the very, very beginning, right? That's where I cemented this flawed belief system. What would happen if I didn't believe that was possible? What would happen if I found out the very first time I did this, that would only ever end badly in the long run? So I hope that gives you something to work on. Alden says, got a similar issue, got good until Thursday. Usually then I fuck it up on the last days of the week. Time pressure is really fucking up my head. Got near my payout multiple times, but then fucked it up in that way. BC says, can I unmute myself? Yeah, for sure. Feel free, man.
Yes, thank you very much. Do you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear, man.
Okay, yeah, so my first language is not English, so I'm going to try my best. What I mean, yeah, you explained a little bit. Every time when I start a new challenge or something, I'm very process oriented. So I don't care about like the outcome or stuff like that. I just follow my plan. And every time when I get closer to like a phase 1 or after passing phase 1 or a first payout, I completely fucked up. I don't know, like it's repeating and repeating and repeating. And I say to myself, I need to like orientate on the process and not on the outcome. But unconsciously, it still has a big impact every time when I get close to something.
So let me ask you a question. You mentioned there the specific points when this tends to happen is either when you get close to passing maybe a phase 1, phase 2, like one of the challenge phases, or when you get close to getting your first payout, right? If you were to hypothetically pass phase 1, pass phase 2, whatever challenge phase it is, or you got your first payout, what changes for you in life?
The confidence.
Why?
I remember the last time after like the payout account, I thought I also saw you mentioned one of the during the live streams.
Okay.
It's not about the payouts; it's about like the marathon for a long time.
Let me reframe that a little bit. When I say what changes for you, does achieving your first payout or getting your first funded account get you any closer to your end goal?
Yeah, if I like if my end goal is to become successful in trading, yeah.
Right. So what I want you to do here is I want you to start focusing on a longer term perspective of your outcomes, because I think what is happening here is your mind is so focused on the short term, it's forgetting to process the fact that actually the first challenge, the first phase, the second phase, the first payout in the grand scheme of things don't mean anything really, right? And I say this not to bring your levels of confidence down. I don't say this to demean any of your achievements or accomplishments. I say this because I want you to realize that the parts that you're celebrating, the parts that you're getting excited over, are not close to the finish line yet. And this is where I take you back to a point in the stream today where I said, I want you to stop focusing on days and weeks, and I want you to start focusing on years and decades, right? So a couple of things I want you to do. Expand your timeline of horizon, as we just suggested. I want you to start thinking about only analyzing and measuring how well you've performed once you've done 100 trades. Fuck phase 1, fuck phase 2, fuck your first payout. 100 trades, right? That should be your benchmark of where I'm measuring my success. And that's just the timeline I want you to start thinking about. The second part of this is I want you to be mindful of the pattern that you're also very, very aware of, which is when I get close to finishing phase 1 or phase 2 or getting my payout, I tend to screw up. That means something happens in my thought process, something happens in my emotions, and then something happens in my actions, which gets me to start acting differently. The fact that you're aware of this is actually a very good thing, because it means now you can be prepared for what happens when it comes next time. So the only thing and the best thing you could possibly do is the next time you start approaching those areas, I want you to be mindful of how this pattern plays out. Be like, hey, I'm 2% away, or I'm one potentially winning trade away from passing the challenge phase or getting my first payout. This is where I tend to screw up. This is the point where you need to be the most process orientated possible. This is where you need to be making sure that you're journaling in the way that you should. This is where you need to be making sure that you're going through that pre-trade checklist in the way that you should. This is where you maybe even want to be assessing, am I comfortable with the amount of money that I'm about to be making? Something that you may not have considered is, if you're going down the prop firm route, maybe the challenge accounts that you're going for are not the right amount for you, right? I think a lot of people like to think or like to go to a phase, and again, I could be presumptuous here. You might be risking an amount that's completely fine for you. I'm trying to tailor this to everyone. You could be risking an amount that maybe you've gone for a 50K or a 100K account, or even a 25K account, whatever it may be, right? With whichever firm you choose. That might be an exciting thing for you. If that is exciting and it opens a door of emotions, it means that you're risking an amount of money that you're not fully comfortable with yet. You may actually be better off scaling your account size down to getting a payout which is far more boring, but allows you to be far more process orientated. Now, it sucks because it means your timeline for making the amount of money that you want has extended. But if you're focused on this idea of years and decades in this game, then actually setting yourself back 3 or 6 months to pass your first phase and then actually overcome that barrier, which you said gives you a certain level of confidence, then you can go up to the next level, because then you know you've done it. You've been there already. You've experienced the payout, right? It's that first stepping stone that's checked off for you. And now you can level up one step further, right? So those are the 3 things I want you to just reflect on. Expand your timeline of horizon, making sure you're prepared with those pre-trade checklists, those process-orientated things based on the pattern at which you described, and then double checking something for yourself, which is the risk management side of things, right? Making sure that you ideally want trading to be as boring as possible. When you can get to that stage, then you can start to scale up slowly. You don't want to try and go for something that feels exciting now, but actually makes you more emotional and therefore less likely to end up hitting the end goal, right? You're better off taking a payout of $100 versus $1,000 if you actually get paid it, right? The potential $1,000 doesn't mean shit to the real $100 if you're actually able to make it. And this is where it goes back to playing that long game, okay? So I hope that helps. Hope that gives you something to,
yes, thank you,
to focus on. Pleasure, man. Sorry, so Alden said, got similar issue, got good until Thursday, and then I usually fuck it up on the last day of the week. The time pressure is really screwing with my head. Got near my payout multiple times, but fucked it up in that way. The closer we got to the goal, the more careful with the approach we need to be. 100%, right? So Alden, and again for BC as well, something to focus on here is your standards of what to expect from the markets are always going to change depending on your experiences. I put up a quote on Twitter. I replied to somebody else online. It was this idea that once the mind has experienced once the mind has been exposed to new experiences, it can't go back to its old dimensions, right? There was a point in time, I remember, when I thought making a certain amount of money would be absolutely life-changing. And then you get to a point where you get to that level and then you exceed that. And then making that amount of money that used to be life-changing is now your floor. You're like, if I'm making less than that, it feels weird. It doesn't feel normal. And so your mind always adjusts to whatever you experience. And so the reason I encourage to keep that process-orientated approach and to be so mindful for at the beginning, even if it means reducing your exposure, once you've had that experience of getting past that hurdle, you then start to believe within yourself, I can do it. It is possible. I can be process oriented. I can do the right things. The problem is most of us are adding this addition of money that sometimes, often, we're not really comfortable with, right? So Alden, again, you understand your pattern of behavior already, right? You're already mindful of the idea that the last days of the week is when you tend to screw it up. The two things I would get you to focus on specifically outside of the things that I've already mentioned to BC is firstly, get clearer on why it screws up towards the end of the week, right? Why specifically are you putting so much pressure at the end of the week to be able to hit those specific targets? And then again, what can you do differently to break that pattern of behavior, right? Is it about accepting losses a little bit better? Is it about not trying to rush the process and expanding that that horizon, the timeline horizon of your goals? Is it about maybe you just need to create more pain to understand how much of an impact this is having on your situation, right? So just applying a variety of the different concepts that we've talked about over the last few weeks. Go back and look at your performance on a Thursday or a Friday, and then extrapolate those out over the next 52 trading weeks. And understand, if you keep screwing up and you keep doing the same shit you're always doing now, you're going to keep getting those exact same outcomes going forward, right? Make it as painful as possible, which opens the door to make it easier to start to break free from those habits, okay? Again, hope that helps. Hope it gives you something to focus on. But, you know, in all honesty, you guys are already thinking about things in the right way, which is both of you have come to me with a problem, but you actually have a very good level of awareness around that problem. And when I talk about that, I'm talking about the pattern at which it plays out. The fact that you can identify it's an end of week behavior or close to completion of my challenge or payout. These are really, really important things. A lot of people are not aware of the pattern at which these are paying out. Once you have the pattern, you can manage your expectations better, and then changing that behavior becomes far, far easier. Amplify the pain, talk about your why, all of these variety of things, right? They can all be added on to help fix your problem going forward, okay? Any other questions before we wind down? Okay, perfect. I think we will call it a day. Guys, make sure you all keep in touch. Whether you shoot me a DM, whether you reach out on Discord, wherever it may be. Genuinely, a big part of why I do this is I like to help people achieve their goals. And I would love to know how you guys are getting on in the future. I can promise you there are going to be more challenges, more hurdles, without a shadow of a doubt, guaranteed. But there will also be more wins and more highs coming your way. And I want to be able to see you guys experience that journey for yourselves and hopefully get you a little bit closer towards your end goal. So please, everyone that's watching this, please feel free to keep in touch. Like I said, I'm available on Discord. You can find me on Twitter and stuff as well. I can't promise I'll get back to you immediately, but I will do my best. I tend to, at least once every 1 or 2 weeks, I try and clear out everything in terms of my DMs and stuff like that. So I would love to keep in touch with you guys. It's been a pleasure over the last few weeks. Again, I hope it's been valuable. Hope you've taken something away. Hope it's created those little mindset shifts to get you through those hurdles and roadblocks going forward. I hope you have a fantastic rest of the weekend, and I look forward to hearing from you guys in the future. Thank you guys so much, and I'll speak to you very, very soon. Take care.